I want to take a few minutes to talk about test-driven development and why it is that we see an explosion in the amount of test code. In a lot of the projects I'm looking at, I see 2 to 3 times as much test code as I see actual production code. And there's something that seems quite odd with that difference. The amount of test code shouldn't be that large. One of the reasons is that in many cases there is a tendency to have a focus on the implementation details. So instead of just looking at the public interfaces of the classes that we're supposed to test, we'll test each individual class that are part of the implementation details and not really part of the public interface. And that makes the test brittle. So whenever something in the implementation details changes, now the test will break, even if we actually preserve the behavior of the test. And so that's one downside of it, that because we write tests in this way, they will be much more prone to fail. The other issue is that if we take the approach that every time we spin up a new class, every time we create a new class, it's essentially a public interface, and then we'll create a test suite for it. And that's not really helpful, because a lot of the classes that are sitting below a public interface are really implementation specific details. So it depends on how the developer actually wanted to realize the functionality and expose that through the public interface. So if he changes his mind and he wants to change how the implementation is done, the test shouldn't break, but usually they do, and that's the problem. But let's look at some drawings, so I'll explain a bit more what I actually mean. It's usually easier to see. Let me try to illustrate what I mean when I said that we are having too many implementation details as part of our code. So if we run through the standard TDD process, you'll start off by writing some test case, and that test case will test some code. That's how we usually do it. And then we go to the refactoring step, and it could be that we look at the code inside this class, and we see that we will benefit from spinning that off into a new class. We'll create ourselves a new class containing some of that functionality. Now this class is dependent on this class, but if we want to test this thing in isolation, we need to have this part under control, and that's usually by mocking it. So we'll end up having our test case, and then we'll implement a mock of this class, and then we will be able to, using this one, test our class. And that means that now we have encoded some information about this class, which is an implementation details for this one, inside our test case. We're actually setting this one up, and that's kind of the problem. Because now we have additional code to control this part, and we have the added complexity. And if for some reason we want to change both how this class works and how it operates from this class, then our test breaks. Even if we are actually preserving the behavior of the test, it is still going to be broken. And then we have to refactor all of our test cases because now they're broken. Another way to think about this is to use a concept called sociable tests. So instead of seeing the original class as the unit of isolation, we can see the public interface as the unit of isolation. So if we write again a test case and we are implementing our class to make our test pass, and again if our refactoring step makes us spin off a new class, then this class, the new one that we're depending on, that will be internal. And an internal class is not something that we're publicly exposing. It is something that is that's part of how we are implementing the functionality of our first class. So now the isolation unit will be this one. Since it's internal and usually our test cases are residing in a different project, the test cases will actually not be able to access this class. So the only way that it can test is through the public interface of our class. And that makes the test case simpler, and we have fewer of them because now we don't have a full test suite for all of our internal classes. So that improves both the complexity and the amount of code that we have in our test cases.